Yesterday the hospital called. Your sister just woke up. I rushed there. She looked at me and smiled. But the doctor opened the file and whispered, "How is this possible? Her death was recorded yesterday. What secret was buried behind this?" Watch till the end to uncover the truth, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this channel. I am Angelique, 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by the bonds of family, fragile threads woven between love, silence, betrayal, and secrets too heavy for a single heart to carry. The day the hospital called me, my world turned into a labyrinth where every corner promised answers but delivered deeper confusion. The nurse's voice trembled as she said, "Your sister has woken up." Those words sliced through me like glass, because 24 hours earlier I had been handed her official death certificate, signed and sealed with authority that seemed unquestionable. I rushed to the hospital, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the last anchor holding me to reality. The road blurred in streaks of light and shadow, the evening sky heavy with clouds that pressed down like judgment. My chest tightened with each mile, memories of my sister's laughter, our whispered promises in childhood, and our unspoken distance in adulthood replaying like a broken film reel. By the time I stormed through the sterile corridors, my heart was a battlefield between hope and dread. There she was, my sister, sitting upright on the bed, her lips curved into a fragile smile that carried both relief and sorrow. My knees almost gave way. I touched her hand, cold yet undeniably alive, and whispered her name as though it might vanish again if I spoke too loudly. The doctor entered, holding a file with pages marked in red ink, confusion etched on his face. He stammered, "This is impossible according to every record. She died yesterday." His words froze the air around us. The fluorescent lights hummed louder, and in that suffocating moment, I felt a terrifying truth coil itself around me. Whatever had happened to my sister, it was not something natural, nor something the hospital could explain. The doctor's disbelief did not fade. It deepened with every page he flipped, every signature he checked, every stamp of authenticity glaring back at him from the file that declared my sister legally dead. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand how his medical science could fail so spectacularly, but my throat felt sealed shut. My sister, meanwhile, simply watched me with eyes that were alive but hollow, as if she were not entirely present in her own body. She whispered, "Angelique, don't ask questions here." Her tone wasn't pleading, it was commanding, urgent, the way someone might speak if invisible ears were pressed against every wall. I leaned closer, my voice cracking. "But you died." I saw the paperwork, the seal from the registrar, the call from the morgue. Her hand tightened on mine with surprising strength, and her lips trembled before she breathed. "That's exactly what they wanted you to believe." The word they echoed in my head like a curse, unanswered, undefined, terrifying in its vagueness. The doctor glanced nervously at the door, then at the ceiling, as though even he feared being overheard. He muttered something about hospital protocol, about running further tests, but his words lacked conviction, his eyes darting like a man who already knew he was part of something larger, darker and unstoppable. I guided my sister's fragile frame as she tried to sit up, every movement of hers deliberate, careful, as though she had been stitched back together, and one wrong motion might tear her apart again. I kept asking myself the same impossible question. How does a woman declared dead, body tagged and documented, rise the next day with breath in her lungs and words on her lips? But the more pressing question was why. Why would anyone orchestrate such a cruel deception, and why was my sister both victim and secret keeper in this twisted play? In the silence between us, machines beeped steadily, mocking me with their certainty of life when certainty itself had just been shattered. I tried to steady my breathing, but each second in that hospital room felt like standing at the edge of a chasm, staring down into an abyss that could swallow me whole. My sister's grip on my hand remained firm, a strange paradox of fragility and force, as though she was silently begging me to listen without questioning too much. Her eyes, once vibrant and mischievous in our younger days, now seemed dimmed, clouded by a heaviness I could not name. I whispered. Who did this to you? Who declared you dead? She shook her head, her lips tightening in a warning that chilled my spine. Not here, she mouthed, barely audible. The air in the room thickened, not just with the sterile scent of antiseptic, but with a suffocating tension, as if unseen forces were watching us, waiting for the wrong word. The doctor excused himself abruptly, muttering about additional scans, but the way his eyes refused to meet mine betrayed something more: fear, perhaps guilt. As the door closed behind him, I leaned closer to my sister, determined to peel back even a fraction of the truth. You are gone. We grieved you. The hospital signed papers, and now you're alive. How can you expect me not to ask? Her gaze softened for the briefest moment, and a single tear slid down her cheek, but when she finally spoke, her voice was sharp, resolute. Angelique, if you want to survive this with me, you'll stop asking and start watching. The word struck me like a blade. Start watching what? Start watching whom? I felt my pulse pounding in my ears, every instinct screaming that I was stepping into a labyrinth where the exit might never exist. My mind flashed to our childhood, the countless times we had hidden from our father's anger, whispering secrets under blankets, swearing to protect each other no matter what. That same bond was calling me now, demanding I trust her even in this impossible nightmare. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly, though questions burned inside me like wildfire. The monitor beside her beeped rhythmically, steady, almost mocking, as if daring me to believe in life while everything around me whispered of death. The hallway outside her room stretched endlessly, shadows clinging to its sterile white walls as if the building itself was trying to swallow its secrets. I stepped out briefly to collect my thoughts, my shoes echoing in sharp staccato against the linoleum floor, a sound far too loud for the suffocating silence that hung there. Nurses passed by with tight smiles that didn't reach their eyes, their gazes flicking over me quickly, as if lingering too long might draw them into my orbit of confusion. Something about their hurried steps, the way they clutched clipboards to their chests, screamed of fear disguised as routine. I leaned against the cool wall, pulling out my phone, scrolling back to the message I had received the day before. We regret to inform you of your sister's passing. It was there, black and white, undeniable. Yet just beyond that door, she was alive, fragile but breathing, her hand warm against mine. My pulse raced as I dialed the number from which the hospital had called with the death notification, desperate for an explanation, but all I heard was a hollow voice. This number is no longer in service. I gripped the phone tighter, a cold sweat forming at the back of my neck. A sudden flicker from the fluorescent lights above made me glance up, my reflection in the polished metal of the ceiling bent, seeming warped, stretched, unrecognizable. My sister's warning replayed in my head. Stop asking, start watching. So, I forced myself to observe instead of demand answers. That was when I noticed the door across the hall slightly ajar, a faint hum escaping as though machinery was hidden inside. I took a cautious step closer, but before I could peek through, a man in scrubs appeared out of nowhere, his smile practiced, his eyes flat. Family should stay with the patient, he said softly, though the undertone felt like a command. My throat tightened as I nodded and backed away, slipping back into my sister's room where she sat waiting, her eyes locked on the door I had almost opened. She whispered the words before I could even ask. They're listening. I froze at her warning, the hairs on my arms rising as if the very air had turned electric. My instinct screamed to run, to grab her hand and flee the hospital altogether, but the steadiness in her gaze held me captive. She looked weaker than I had ever seen her, yet her presence commanded the space more than any doctor or orderly ever could. They're listening, she repeated, softer now, her lips barely moving. My voice faltered as I whispered back. Who are they? Her eyes darted toward the ceiling corners, to the blinking red light I hadn't noticed before. A camera, silent, unblinking, aimed directly at her bed. My heart slammed against my ribs. Hospitals used cameras, yes, but this one felt different, more invasive, like a hunter's eye rather than a guardian's. She squeezed my hand, urging me not to speak further. So I sat there, pretending to be calm, but inside I was unraveling. To distract myself, I studied her face, searching for clues. There was something new etched into her skin, faint lines around her temples, like scars carefully concealed beneath makeup. My chest tightened. Those hadn't been there before. She caught my stare and shook her head quickly, silently commanding me not to ask. The machine beside her beeped, each sound stretching into eternity, and I wondered if the rhythm itself was coded, if we were surrounded not by life-saving technology, but by instruments of surveillance. I leaned closer and murmured as faintly as I could, "Then show me what to watch." For a flicker of a second, a spark of relief lit her face. She glanced at the nightstand drawer, and then back at me. My pulse thundered as I reached for it, half expecting alarms to shriek, but instead I found a folded piece of paper hidden beneath a stack of hospital brochures. Inside was a single line, scrawled in her familiar handwriting yet shaky, desperate. "Don't believe the death certificate. Don't believe the hospital. Don't believe anyone." My throat went dry, and for the first time, I realized this was far bigger than one mistake in paperwork. It was a conspiracy that had swallowed my sister whole, and now it was pulling me in with her. The note shook in my trembling hands, its ink smudged at the edges as though written in haste, perhaps even under duress. I wanted to demand answers immediately, to grab my sister and shake the truth out of her, but her pale face and the faint tremor in her fingers reminded me she had endured something unimaginable. If she said to watch, then I would watch. I slid the paper into my pocket, heart hammering as footsteps echoed outside her room. A nurse entered, her smile stretched thin, her eyes glazed like glass. She adjusted the 4-line with a precision that seemed more rehearsed than necessary, then glanced at me. "She's stable now," the nurse said, her voice too monotone, too measured, as though scripted. I thanked her, though suspicion gnawed at me, and when she left, I noticed my sister's eyes following the nurse until the door clicked shut. The moment we were alone, she leaned forward and whispered, "Don't eat or drink anything they give you. Don't let them take my blood again." The raw terror in her voice chilled me, but I nodded, committing her warning to memory. My mind churned, replaying the impossibility of it all, official documents, signatures, a morgue report. How could every layer of authority be complicit? Unless it wasn't a mistake. Unless it was deliberate. I pressed her hand, searching for courage in her trembling grip. "Why would they do this to you?" I asked carefully, though I half expected her silence. She closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners, and whispered, "Because I found out what I was never supposed to see." My breath hitched, the words rattling through me like gunfire. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push, because in that moment the doorknob rattled again. Another figure stepped in, this time not a nurse, not a doctor, but a man in a dark suit, his badge tucked inside his pocket as though he didn't want it to be seen. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Ms. Angelique," he said, voice smooth like oil, "we need to speak privately about your sister's condition." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized that whatever I thought I knew was about to be rewritten in ways I could never have imagined. The man in the suit closed the door with deliberate calm, the click echoing like the sound of a lock sealing my fate. He did not sit, did not even glance at my sister. His gaze was fixed entirely on me, as though she were irrelevant to the conversation about her own existence. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively shifted closer to her bed, creating a barrier of sorts between him and her fragile body. He introduced himself with a name so ordinary it felt false, Mr. Collins, spoken too smoothly, rehearsed, as though he'd said it 1,000 times before under different ceilings and to different terrified listeners. He withdrew a folder from his jacket and slid it across the tray table toward me. "This is classified," he murmured, "but given your unfortunate involvement, you deserve clarity." My fingers hesitated before touching it, my instincts warning me that opening it might unravel something I could never repair. Still, curiosity burned hotter than fear. Inside were photographs, grainy, night vision images of my sister strapped to a gurney, her body covered in wires, her eyes wide open yet lifeless. Each shot was time-stamped after the official record of her death. My stomach lurched violently, while rising in my throat, but I forced myself to keep flipping. Notes scribbled in margins referenced resuscitation protocols and extended observation windows, clinical words that meant nothing to me except cruelty. I felt his eyes studying me, measuring my reaction, savoring my confusion. My sister reached for my arm, whispering, "Don't trust him." Colin smiled faintly, as if he had heard, and leaned closer. "Your sister is very special, Ms. Angelique. Most people don't return after biological termination. But she did. That makes her valuable." The way he said valuable curdled my blood, reducing her to a commodity, an experiment, a specimen. I snapped the folder shut, glaring at him, and hissed, "She's a human being." For the first time, his smile faltered, but only slightly. He placed his hands behind his back, pacing slowly, then added, "Humanity is irrelevant when survival of knowledge is at stake." My sister's grip tightened on me, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Please, Angelique, don't let them take me again." The word again thundered in my skull, sparking questions I wasn't ready to face. The moment that single word, again, left her lips, the room shifted. It was as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen, the shadows lengthening under the fluorescent glow, swallowing every corner until only the three of us existed in a suffocating triangle of truth, fear, and control. Collins's eyes sharpened at her slip, his carefully composed mask cracking for a fraction of a second. He stepped closer, voice dropping into something colder, metallic. "You weren't supposed to remember that," he said. My sister recoiled, shaking her head as though trying to push back the tide of memory threatening to drown her. I wrapped an arm protectively around her shoulders, glaring at him with a defiance I didn't feel. My own knees were trembling, but I refused to let him see weakness. "She remembers enough," I snapped, my voice steadier than the storm inside me. "And I'll make sure the world knows what you've done." His smirk returned, crueler this time, as if my threat were laughable. "The world doesn't care," he replied. "Do you think you're the first family member to scream injustice? Paperwork exists to silence screams. Records can be rewritten, graves reassigned, memories adjusted." His words dripped like venom, deliberate, taunting. I wanted to lunge at him, to tear the arrogance from his face, but my sister's trembling fingers clutched my wrist, anchoring me in place. Her eyes pleaded with me not to act recklessly. She whispered so faintly I barely caught it, "Angelique, the cameras." I froze, realizing every defiant word, every tear, every heartbeat had been captured, cataloged, stored in some archive we would never access. Collins leaned down until his shadow swallowed us both. "Your loyalty to her is touching," he said, "but loyalty is dangerous when you don't understand what you're protecting." He straightened his tie and walked to the door, pausing only to add, "Think carefully. We'll be back for her soon, alive or otherwise." And then he was gone, leaving the air poisoned, the silence screaming louder than any words. My sister broke down then, shaking violently, her tears soaking my sleeve. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for answers. I was fighting against something vast, faceless, and merciless. And they already had their eyes fixed on us. I held her as she wept, my own tears burning but refusing to fall, because if I broke, she would shatter completely. The steady beeping of the heart monitor became unbearable, like a metronome counting down to the moment they would return. I wanted to believe we had time, but Collins's parting words left me certain that time was the very thing slipping fastest through our fingers. I whispered into her hair, "We'll leave tonight. I'll get you out of here." She shook her head violently, gripping my arm with desperate strength. "You don't understand," she whispered, eyes wide and unfocused, like a child waking from a nightmare. "They don't let people leave. Once you're marked, there's nowhere to hide." Her words sent an icy spear through me, but I couldn't accept them. I refused to. "Then we'll find somewhere they can't reach us," I insisted, though even as I spoke, my mind clawed for places, options, escape routes. Her hand slipped into mine, trembling, and she whispered so faintly I almost missed it. I wasn't the only one. My chest tightened, dread twisting like a knife in my gut. What do you mean? I asked. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the camera in the corner, then back to me. There are others, dozens, maybe hundreds. All declared dead. All alive, but not really free. My breath hitched, and for a long moment the world seemed to tilt sideways. It wasn't just her, it was systemic, industrial, an entire machine built to consume lives and erase truths. I pressed my forehead to hers, whispering fiercely, "Then we'll expose them. We'll bring it all down." She shook her head again, tears spilling faster. "They erase those who try." My jaw clenched, rage burning hotter than fear. I wanted to scream at the cameras, to tear them down, to let whoever was watching know I wasn't afraid. But deep inside, I was terrified. My sister leaned closer, her lips brushing my ear as she breathed words that made my blood run cold. "The reason I survived is because they need me. And now they'll need you too." Her confession lodged itself deep in my chest, a poison that spread through every vein, turning fear into something heavier. Dread mixed with inevitability. If they needed her, and now they needed me, then there was no simple escape, no window to climb through or back door to slip out of. We weren't merely victims of circumstance. We had become assets in a game we didn't even know existed. My sister's breathing quickened as though speaking the truth had cost her what little strength she had left. I squeezed her hand, whispering, "Tell me why. Tell me what they want from us." Her eyes glazed for a moment, as if she were fighting an internal war, then she whispered a single word, "Memory." The syllable hung between us, sharp and incomprehensible. I frowned, urging her to continue, and she finally explained, each word dragged out as though it were dangerous to release. "When I was gone, they opened my mind, took things I didn't even know I remembered. Things about people, places, conversations from years ago. Details, codes, faces, secrets I never knew I had seen." My breath caught. The scars on her temple, the hollow look in her eyes, they all made a grotesque sense now. They had mined her very consciousness, stripped her of privacy, turned her into a living archive. My stomach twisted violently, horror clawing at my throat. I asked, voice shaking, "And what do they find?" She shut her eyes, tears streaking down her cheeks, and shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever it was, it's why they can't let me go. And why they won't let you go either." A wave of nausea overcame me, but beneath it surged a fiery resolve. They could manipulate papers, falsify death certificates, bury truth in silence, but I would not let them consume us without a fight. I brushed her damp hair back, whispering, "Then we'll give them nothing. We'll burn everything they want to steal." For the first time, she smiled weakly, but behind that fragile smile was a terror that told me the battle had only just begun. The smile she offered was fragile, like a paper lantern fighting wind, yet within it flickered a stubborn flame I recognized, one that had guided us through childhood storms. I pressed my forehead to hers, feeling the rapid rhythm of her pulse under my cheek, as if it were a drumbeat calling us to arms. "We need allies," I said, my voice low but steady, tasting resolve for the first time in days. "People who don't belong to them, people who will see and act." She nodded, exhaustion and fierce clarity warring across her features. "There's someone," she whispered. "A friend from college, Maya. She runs a small investigative newsroom now, fights corruption quietly." I told her about things I couldn't explain years ago in fragments. If anyone can dig without being noticed, it's her. I felt hope prick my skin like cold light. "Then we contact Maya. We leak what we can, safe channels, burner phones, encrypted emails, a dead drop. If there are dozens like you, we find them. If there are records, we expose them. If there are tombs with empty caskets, we open them." Her eyes widened, and for the first time she laughed, short, incredulous, but real. "You make it sound simple. They have lawyers, contacts, power that reaches places you can't imagine. Then we cut them down with truth," I snapped. Paperwork can be falsified, but not every eye can be bought. Someone will notice if we pull even a single thread. She winced at the aggression in my tone and smoothed my sleeve with a trembling hand. Angelique, survival first. We move at night. I know a route from when they experimented. A service corridor, old maintenance shafts. We can slip out, but only if you trust me completely. If you hesitate, they will notice, and then she didn't finish. The threat hung there, a silent noose. I swallowed, the weight of choice pressing down like iron. Trusting her completely felt like stepping off a cliff, but I had no other path. I leaned close and whispered, "I trust you. Teach me the shadows." She smiled, and in that smile, I saw our parents' stubbornness reflected, the same fierce unwillingness to bow. "Good," she breathed. "Then tonight we leave. Tonight we start looking for the others." The room seemed to contract and expand with the sudden change in rhythm, the heartbeat monitors, the distant calls of nurses, the soft hum of hospital machinery. All resumed their roles in a life that now felt foreign to me. I felt adrenaline sharpen my senses into a tool. Every sound, every footstep would now be a signal. I made a list in my head. Burn any hospital-belonging garments, carry only essential documents, memorize faces of staff who lingered too long. Maya, burn her phones, dead drops at the old. My sister closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, steady and resolute. "There's more," she said. When they took me, I glimpsed files, snippets on encrypted drives about memory acquisition contracts, about sponsorship by private entities, about politicians and corporate logos beside clinical notes. It's not a rogue hospital. It's an industry with clients who pay handsomely for things no one should trade. The color drained from my face. Greed, power, nameless faces at polished tables, signing away lives as if they were numbers on a spreadsheet. The nausea returned, but this time it was undercut by something hotter, rage that felt almost righteous. Then we will become a problem they cannot ignore. We will leak names, go public carefully, line up witnesses, get legal help. We'll make sure there are cameras that don't belong to them, journalists who cannot be bought, and lawyers who remember why law wants them. She pinched my hand, hard enough that pain flooded my senses and anchored me. "Angelique, if we are going to do this, there's one more thing. You must learn to disappear in plain sight. You will need to move, to change, to become someone who leaves no imprint." They watch patterns. Patterns make prisons. I stared at her, the enormity of the instructions settling in. Becoming invisible in a world designed to see everything felt like learning a new language overnight. But I also knew that to save her, and whoever else had been taken, I would learn it by fire. "Teach me," I said. "Make me untraceable. Make me fearless." She laughed at that last word, a sound that tasted like iron and salt. Fearless is a long road, but begin with one step. Tonight, when the ward grows quiet, you slip out, go to the bakery, leave the first drop. I will follow 2 blocks behind. Do not make eye contact with anyone in blue scrubs. If they call your name, keep walking. If a camera blinks, cover it with a cloth. Do you understand? "I understand," I repeated, each syllable falling into place like bricks. "And Angelique," she stopped then smiled. "Don't forget who you are. You are not only a sister. You are a storm. Midnight is the hour. Be ready. Midnight is the hour. Be ready." I stepped into the night like a thought slipping from a mouth. Quiet, deliberate, practiced. The hospital's shape receded behind me, pale windows like watching eyes, and the street opened like a throat into which I had to disappear. Each rule my sister had taught me threaded through my mind. Move without patterns, do not accept fluids or pills, never meet a gaze that looks like recognition, cover any camera that blinks. I walked the service corridor she had described, its metal door protesting with a long, soft groan, and slid down the narrow maintenance shaft into the alley where the bakery's back door breathed warm light, and the owner signaled with a single nod. I left the first dead drop among stale loaves, an envelope with a name and a number, a line that was small but enormous, Maya. Then I walked 2 blocks away and waited, my body tuned to the city's small noises, my senses stitched into a new kind of vigilance. Figures moved in the dark like other claims on the night. One, then two, then a small group with faces set in determination and fear. They led me to a cramped newsroom that smelled of burnt coffee and the iron resolve of people who refused to let stories die. Maya was a woman with eyes that had learned to read lies. She and her team took what we had: timestamps that didn't match, an official file that blinked in and out of registries, photographs with timestamps that contradicted certificates, and they began to weave it into a net that could not be ignored. We worked through nights that dissolved into one another, building evidence piece by piece. Forensic reports that showed tampered timestamps, camera logs from independent feeds, bank transfers that connected contractors to shell companies, and the names of private labs whose logos had appeared next to clinical notes. Each reveal made us smaller in some ways. Fear gnawed at us. Allies were scared off by threats. Smear campaigns tried to drown us. But it also made our case sharper, surgical, undeniable. When we went public, we did it with strategy. Live streams on platforms that could not be bought, unedited footage played simultaneously in multiple jurisdictions, witnesses prepared to speak under legal protection. The blow landed. The institution scrambled to counter with denials, with lawyers who tried to bury things under paperwork, but the truth had already found mouths that would not be silenced. Audits were launched, subpoenas were issued, and a regulatory inquiry forced contractors into the thin daylight of public scrutiny. They struck back with predictable cruelty, threatening calls, attempts to discredit witnesses, offers to recant in exchange for money, but the movement that rose was not only ours, it was communal. People who had once feared speaking stepped forward. Families of other survivors, those who had been declared dead and yet were still bearing the scars of stolen nights, joined our chorus. Even then, the battle was not a cinematic collapse of an empire. It was a long erosion, lawsuits, hearings, resignations, and slow teeth-grinding accountability. In the quiet hours when the headlines cooled and the lawyers argued in rooms where the microphones were off, I learned how much I had changed. The girl who once believed generosity could fix everything had hardened into someone who understood justice required instruments, evidence, allies, relentless patience. My sister healed in ragged increments. Sometimes her nights were haunted by the memory of wires and cold lights, but her laughter returned in small, fierce pieces, and we rebuilt a life that honored what we had lost. We trained others to spot the pattern: how contracts hid predators, how private money could corrupt care, how official papers could be weaponized. The trade in memory did not disappear overnight. Some men slipped through legal loopholes, and some deals remained obscured by lawyers' pens. But enough light had been poured into the system that the trade changed shape. Clinics adopted independent audits, whistleblower protections strengthened, and a handful of powerful contractors faced consequences they could not buy away. The transformation was not merely external. I changed, too, grief braided with a new form of resolve. I learned to live with cameras in corners and to speak in ways that could not be clipped into lies. I learned to love despite scars that sometimes flared like fresh wounds. And I learned the weight of a promise. If I survived this, I would make sure someone else would not be traded like a ledger entry. So I kept working, teaching, and testifying, turning revenge, not into petty vindictiveness, but into an engine for reform and protection, for resilience that could become a tool for those who could not yet fight. In the end, what I won was not total justice. There is no clean victory when human lives have been bent and brokered, but a practical, living form of accountability that helped close some doors and cracked others open. My sister and I stood at the edge of a room one rainy afternoon, watching people move through hospital corridors that now had extra eyes that could not be controlled by a single hand, and she squeezed my fingers and said, "We survived. We turned our grief into a shield." I looked at her then, the woman who had been declared dead, and felt an elemental ferocity rise in me that felt both ancient and brand new. I have become someone who will not be erased, someone who learned how to speak when silence would have killed others. If this story helped you understand that resilience can become a weapon against corruption, or if you feel the stir of justice in your chest, follow what comes next, because we are not done. Like, subscribe.